Hello everyone. The next topic which we will be discussing is about the mechanism of breathing. So in these slides what we will be discussing is about the two phases of breathing. That is the inspiration, that is during which the atmospheric pressure is drawn in, and expiration, in which the alveolar air is released out. So the movement of air that is into and out of the lungs, it is being carried by a pressure gradient between the lungs and the atmosphere. So we will be discussing or focusing on these two methods, and we will be discussing these two methods in detail. Now let's start with the introduction first. That the air which we breathe in and out of the lungs, they varies in its pressure. So we breathe in the oxygen and we release out the carbon dioxide from the lungs, and they varies with its pressure. So when there is a fall in air pressure, the alveolar spaces falls and the air enters the lungs. And as the pressure of the alveoli which exceeds within the atmospheric pressure, the air is blown from the lungs. So that is known as the expiration. Now the flow rate of air is in proportion to the magnitude of the pressure difference. Now the mechanism of breathing has been divided into two phases, or two phases, that is the expiration and the inspiration. So we will be discussing each of these mechanisms in detail. So first we will start with is the inspiration part and then expiration. So what is happening is inspiration, it is being initiated by the contraction of the diaphragm, which increases the volume of the thoracic chamber into the anterior posterior axis. So this is the diaphragm which is being representing here. It contracts. So there is a contraction of the diaphragm. Inspiration, in which the air is being taken in. For example, oxygen is taken in and the diaphragm will contract here. So this is the process of inspiration. And if we talk about the process of expiration, then the diaphragm here will relax. So breathing out is called the expiration, and it is due to the pressure gradient. But in this case, the gradient is in the opposite direction. So the pressure in the lungs is greater than the atmosphere. So the pressure in the lungs will be in greater amount than the atmosphere. So the cavity will reduce here, and in the expiration the thoracic cavity will expand. So this is the difference between the expiration and the inspiration part. Now inspiration is the process where there would be a contraction of the muscle. So as we have seen in the diagram also, that there was a contraction of the diaphragm muscles which is attached to the ribs on the outside, and it pulls out the ribs and it results in the expansion of the chest cavity. So at the onset of inspiration, the inspiratory muscles, they are stimulated to contract and they enlarge the thoracic cavity. So the major inspiratory muscle is the diaphragm, which we are talking about. So the relaxed diaphragm, they have a dome shape, and when the diaphragm contracts, it descends downwards and enlarges the volume of the thoracic cavity by increasing in the vertical dimension. About 75% of the enlargement of this thoracic cavity during quiet inspiration is accomplished by the contraction of the diaphragm. So there is a diaphragm that contracts and moves downward and expands the chest cavity. And there is expansion of the chest cavity, which produces a partial vacuum, and it sucks air into the lungs and fills the expanded alveoli. Now, what is the overall mechanism of this process of breathing? So the process of intake of atmospheric air is called the inspiration. So this is the basic definition, and we have studied about this. and it is an active process. It is considered as an active process. So, when the volume of the thoracic cavity increases, the air pressure will decrease. So, there will be a decrease in the air pressure, and thus the inspiration will take place. There is a contraction of the diaphragm, as we have seen in the diagram also, and it will further increase the volume of the thoracic cavity. The contraction of the diaphragm, it further increases the size of the thoracic cavity, and simultaneously the lungs will expand. With the expansion in the lungs, the air pressure inside the lung will decrease. So the air pressure will decrease here. And the pressure, it just equalizes the atmospheric air, and it rushes inside the lungs. So it will rush inside the lungs. So this is the overall mechanism of the process of inspiration. Now the expiration. So expiration is nothing but the breathing out of the atmospheric air. So it is due to the pressure gradient, but in this specifically in this case, the gradient is in the opposite direction, and the pressure in the lungs will be greater than the pressure which is in the atmosphere. So it is considered once after the gaseous exchange occurs in the lungs and the air is being expelled out. So expiration, which means the air is being expelled out or breathing out. So this is the basic definition of the expiration. Now during this process, the muscles that is attached to the ribs, they contract. So the diaphragm here will relax and leads to the decrease in the volume of the chest cavity, and they increase the pressure of the lungs, which causes the air in the lungs to be pushed out through the nose. So this is the process of expiration. Now what is the mechanism of the expiration? So it is a passive process. In inspiration it was an active process, but in expiration it is a passive process. And there is an exhaling of carbon dioxide. Inspiration is the inhaling of oxygen, and expiration is the exhaling of carbon dioxide. So when it occurs, it is just the opposite of inspiration. So all the points will be the opposite as it was being done in the inspiration mechanism. In this particularly, it occurs when the size of the thoracic cavity decreases and the pressure outside will increase. So the external intercostal muscle relax and the internal intercostal muscle will contract. So what will happen in this? It will lead to the reduction in the size of the thoracic cavity. So diaphragm, we have seen in the figure as well that it was relaxed and the lungs get compressed. Consequently, the pressure increases and the air is forced outside. So the air will be forced outside and the pressure will increase. So now we will be discussing about the flow chart of the both the inspiration and the expiration mechanism, which is just the brief that what is happening in both the processes. So first we will talk about is the inspiration. So inspiration is, it is in the muscles here will contract. The muscles will contract here. The thoracic volume will increase. So there will be an increase in the thoracic volume. The lungs will stretch and the intrapulmonary volume will increase. And intrapulmonary pressure will decrease. So when the air flows into the lungs down its pressure gradient, there is an intrapulmonary pressure which is equal to the atmospheric pressure. So as we were discussing in the case of expiration, that the pressure in the lungs will be greater than the pressure of the atmosphere, but it is not in the case of inspiration. Inspiration is when the intrapulmonary pressure that is equal to the atmospheric pressure. So this is the overall summary of the process of the inspiration, and it is being depicted in the form of a flow chart to understand this better, that what are the processes of what are the points that takes place in the process of the mechanism of inspiration. Expiration. So here the muscles will relax. So it is just the opposite. In inspiration, the muscles contract, and in expiration, the muscles will relax. There will be a decrease in the thoracic volume. and the elastic lungs recoil passively and the intrapulmonary volume will decrease. It will rise, the pressure will rise and the volume will decrease. So the gases, for example, gas we are here taking as a carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is being exhaled out of the lungs down its pressure gradient, and here the intrapulmonary pressure is equal to the atmospheric pressure. So the intrapulmonary pressure will be equal to the atmospheric pressure. So this was all about the mechanism of breathing. These are references. Thank you.